The first time I heard somebody say something like, what is your favorite book of the Bible? Or what's your favorite individual in the Bible? I always thought it's kind of a weird question because, I don't know, there was a part of me that almost felt like, well, if I have a favorite, does that imply that I somehow don't like the others? Am I being sacrilegious if I do that? But I think it's natural that what we actually do is we start finding out that certain individuals or certain books resonate a little bit more with our lives, the things we've experienced and what our testimony is. If the Bible is the testimony of the entire story of God's interactions with His creation and redeeming His creation, then it makes sense that in our own life stories we would resonate with certain parts more than others. Most of us aren't going to resonate a whole lot with the Levitical law or some of the statistics that you see in Numbers, but we might see that one hero that we draw a lot of strength from in our own times of need. Well, one of those individuals that I resonate with is Matthew, and it's because of how he was called. I think it is such a beautiful story of how God calls us and the attitude we have whenever we are presented an opportunity to actually serve. This is especially poignant as we talk about being a part of a community of believers, because we're presented with opportunities to help, to serve, to provide relief, to build up one another all the time. And yet sometimes we hold back from it. But let's put that on the side burner for a second and just look at Matthew. One of the things you'll read here in a second is the story of how Matthew was actually called as a disciple, and you see this in Matthew 9. What you end up seeing in here is that Matthew really latched on to the fact that he was this tax collector, and yet Jesus called him. In fact, what you end up seeing is at first Matthew stating that Jesus called him as a tax collector, and then the Pharisees coming up and questioning Jesus. Why do you associate with these individuals? And in Jesus' response, he, explains that I didn't come to save the righteous, but the sinners. And I think that's so fascinating that Matthew, immediately after talking about himself being called by Christ, turns around and mentions that Christ stated he didn't come for righteous, but for sinners, which implies that Matthew understands that he wasn't called because he had some kind of talents, or he had, just the time on his hands and it was convenient, or he had the skills or whatever it was. He was called not because of who he was, but because what Christ knew he could do through him. This is something you end up seeing kind of reinforced in the next chapter. In Matthew 10, verse 3, you end up seeing him going through the account of all the different disciples that Christ called. And what's fascinating there is, once again, he talks about all the other individuals. He just mentions their names, key identifiers about them. He mentions the fact that, Peter was the rock. He was the foundation. But then when he mentions himself, he mentions Matthew, the tax collector. And once again, you can see him connecting the fact that he was called, not with what he could be or what he could offer, but what Christ could do. And I think this is important because often when we're presented with the opportunity to be able to serve another individual, to help out, to be a part of a service project, to help out with kids, to give to something that's a worthy cause, whatever it may be, we have the opportunity to do. So often we'll kind of pause and we'll stop for a second and say, well, I don't really know if I'm the right person for that, or I don't really know if I have the skills for that, or I don't really know if I have the energy for that, or if I have the time for that. We'll sit here and focus so much on what we think that we can do that we forget the fact that God didn't choose you to do a certain task or call you to a certain mission because He needed your resume. He called you because He wanted to demonstrate His glory through you. And one of the things that I mentioned there during the break was that, sometimes I think church leaders and organizers, people who are really, really into the whole church thing, they'll fall back on this very convenient but often inaccurate excuse, which is that, well, the reason why people aren't helping out is because they're lazy. It's because they're selfish. And I think the reason why a lot of leaders tend to fall back on that, not just in church, but in every organization or work environment, is because it's convenient. If you can sit here and you can suggest that the reason why somebody isn't helping out or getting involved is because of some personal flaw, then you put it on them instead of what it should really be, which is let's try to figure out how we can build somebody up. Most of the time, whenever somebody isn't getting involved with something, it's because there's something holding them back. It might be an insecurity, the way we typically think of an insecurity, somebody saying, well, I can't do that because X, Y, Z. Or it could be somebody saying, I don't think I can do that because of these pragmatic reasons. But for whatever you want to call it, we end up looking at all these aspects of our own lives and we say, well, the reason why I can't help out in this circumstance is because of X, Y, Z. And we start talking about all these very human factors. And in that whole thing, we're forgetting that faith must be a component of it. If this thing called church community is more than just a club or a community organization like any other organization you can find out there, then faith must play a role in every single thing we do. You can see this most poignantly in the story of how Moses got his calling to go save God's chosen people. It is this beautiful story of, God speaking through the burning bush, and you can easily kind of overlook why it's so important if you just kind of, look at the little scene of what's taking place or go through the, what I call the Vacation Bible School version of the story. But in your small groups here for a second, what I want you to do is really break this down. And what you're going to see is that Moses reflected so many of the different insecurities and, frankly, pragmatic objections that we would have today when it comes to, not wanting to move forward on some kind of calling, not wanting to take some opportunity, not wanting to do or give or to be something in the lives of other people. Moses had all of these objections. And then what's fascinating is that despite all these objections, God patiently went through all of these things to assure him that it's not because of you, it's because of me. It's not because of what you're going to say, it's because of what I'm going to tell you to say. It's not because of who you are, it's because of who I am and who I will be. Perhaps my favorite part of this story is what you actually end up having at the very end. And I say favorite, I mean, it's a little funny if you think about it, because Moses has just gone through all the reasons why God has chosen the wrong person, right? And he sat there and said, I'm not eloquent. He's sitting here saying, who am I that you're going to choose me to do something like this? What if people don't follow me? He goes through all these different explanations, things that, once again, we would say in our world today, and yet God goes through every single one of these things. And still yet, when God, the creator of all things, is putting this calling right in front of him and giving him all of these reasons why, if he just has faith, he will see that God will provide what he needs, he still says, you have the wrong person. I can't do this. And even after that last bit there in chapter 4, it says that God's anger burned. And then he turned around and basically said, fine, look, you're going to go take Aaron, and Aaron's going to be your mouthpiece, and he's going to help you talk. And so once again, you look at this whole thing and say, it is this beautiful picture of God providing, the spiritual sustainment and helping to strengthen our faith as we go through our calling. But then yet, at the same time, at the very end, when Moses still says, I just think I'm the wrong person, God says, no, you're the right person. Here you go. And then, kind of provides the other people around him. And the reason why I say that is because we are here to build up one another. That is the purpose of church. That really is the only purpose in being a part of a community like this, is that everything in the assembly should be for the purpose of building one another up. And as a part of that, what that means is that, whenever you have the opportunity to do something, or you may feel you have a calling or a conviction or something like that, the job of the people around you is not to give you all the reasons why, well, maybe that's not for you. Or it's not to sit here and, help you reason and rationalize and all that kind of stuff. It's to build you up and encourage you. Encourage you in discernment if you need discernment. Encourage you if it's a skill or a talent thing, or maybe it's encourage you because they understand that your faith is what will carry you through. Our job, regardless of whether we are entertaining an individual calling or whether we are seeing other people as they are struggling with what their calling or what their opportunities may be to serve are, our job is to provide that support to one another, to be that family, to be that sense of community that helps encourage one another so that we understand that everything that we do here as a body of Christ is not being done because I have something to offer or because I have skills or because, I have, time and energy and all that kind of stuff. It has nothing to do with me. I am irrelevant. My only purpose is to be the vessel that God can use to demonstrate His glory, His works, and His wonders that He can use in order to display His goodness to the lost world around us. That's our lesson that we have for you today. I hope you're able to get something out of it. Until we can meet again, God bless.